The topic I've chosen for this essay is crunch time. Now, crunch time is a period in game development where employees work longer hours than they're used to complete a game. This is typically 14 hours or more of work a day instead of the usual 8. This is bad for the employees because basically it wears them down psychologically, and it's generally a product of bad management where the managers didn't take into account the different pitfalls that can arise while developing a game. But there's also the thought that crunch time is basically something that is necessary since the management can never actually accommodate all of the different pitfalls that may happen. There's a lot of unexpected events that will happen during the game development. And also, crunch time, while being stressful, also encourages creativity. And one of the professors I interviewed stated that it's during crunch time that some of the best and most creative solutions appear. There's just something about being under the pressure of a fast approaching deadline that makes the brain more agile. There's no we'll take care of it later. Later is right now, and you have to come up with solutions. That is why you try to minimize and prepare for crunch and for possible eventualities that you can predict. The reward is so much sweeter after the challenge is met and crushed. I chose this topic because I'm a video game design major, and after I graduate and go into video game design, this will be a very important thing as crunch time affects most of the people in the industry. Basically, my position on this topic is that I'm against crunch time, but I feel that it is necessary for small game companies as they do not have the amount of time or investment already put into the game or their game designing methods that they can accommodate for all of the different pitfalls that may happen. They can't predict these things because they just never had it happen to them. And in theory, it can work. They could predict all these things, but that would also require a lot more of a period of time where they planned for these pitfalls and basically accommodate them within their work schedule when they really can't afford that time of incubation like AAA companies can because they simply are working on more projects that are using the same tools. So I'm against crunch time for larger companies, and I feel that it can be avoided as long as their management decides to not have crunch time, as it is something that is beneficial to them. Now, there is a historical background of the Fair Labor Standard Act, which basically allows companies from paying overtime to computer professionals engaged in a strictly defined set of tasks and making over a certain amount per hour. So basically this means that they are allowed to not pay overtime to the video game design employees because of the fact that they're paid enough per hour on their regular time. Yeah, this act can be overridden by states, but then there's some states like California who simply have no other rules overriding it. So that's why a lot of the AAA companies move to California in order to avoid paying those extra overtime hours. There's not much of personal experience here, as I've not been in the game industry, but I have worked long hours on projects, so I can personally say that they do create a lot of stress, and it's definitely not a healthy way to complete projects on a regular basis. Now, researchers that study game design have conducted studies that interview and sample from game designers to figure out this experience. So these researchers are Jonathan Blow and Nick Dreyer-Weatherford. Jonathan talked about how there are many difficulties that can be overlooked when trying to make a schedule for their game. Now, small companies can't really accommodate all these things as they're like things that are very small and add up over a very long period of time, like compile times. They're just simply things that they would need to experience firsthand in order to get a grasp on how much time it takes up. There's also the factor of new tools that are being used to create these games, as they don't always work in the same genre, these small game companies. They're unlike the AAA game companies, which always work in the same genre, and so they work with the same tools, and they know the different pitfalls that are built into these tools. So if the AAA game companies wanted to, they could eliminate these things from their schedule. Now, Nick Dreyer-Weatherford discusses how these pitfalls that cause companies to need to crunch, the AAA studios don't actually have those, or they already worked out these pitfalls, so they should not have crunch time happening in their companies. However, it is beneficial for these companies to have crunch time as they do not need to pay employees overtime, so it saves them both time and the fact that they could make smaller project like scopes, and also money because they do not have to pay these employees extra money for overtime. Two people I've interviewed for this project is Jesse O'Brien and Steve McKenzie. Both are professors at RIT and both have worked for a long period in the industry. Jesse worked as a model designer and as a result of this has not experienced crunch as much as other employees in game design, but he still has experienced crunch. He found that game programmers are actually the most likely job to experience crunch time, and that crunching is basically a band-aid for employers when they don't have enough time management just factored in. Things like proper scheduling or hiring more workers will make crunch something that can be avoided. Steve McKenzie was a programmer who recalls working 72-hour periods in order to get projects done. He finds that crunch periods can bring out the worst in people as it's a very high-stress environment, and they will be at each other's throats because of the fact that everyone wants to complete this project in order to not be fired or have the game be canceled. But also, at the same time, Steve believes that it encourages creativity because of the fact that the brains are under such stress that they need to basically complete these little goals or they will not be able to pass their project. So because of this, it's a period when most creative ideas appear. And also he believes that these things cannot be avoided, that crunch periods will always be a factor of creative industries just because there's a lot of different features being added at the same time or things being taken out because they simply didn't pass the quality satisfaction. There also are two people against my position, the writer Fabio Petrillo, who felt that this is also the nature of the field. And computer software, he looked at the statistics and found that most of the projects in computer software will be consuming more resources and also take longer because of the simple fact that there is feature creep. Now, feature creep is where features keep on getting added to the project, but they've not been taken account for in the initial project development, so there's no time set aside to work on these new features, and so the project needs to either be extended or a crunch period needs to happen. Now, there's also the writer Peter Gregg, who feels that the growth of game design allows for this behavior. Now, game design has now become a global industry, and as a result of this, they could basically move their headquarters anywhere in the world. There's people in every single country waiting to get jobs in this field. And because of that, they can travel to any location that suits their needs. It's basically supply and demand at that point. They will always find one country that allows for crunch times. I find that small game companies will not be able to eliminate crunch as there's just a lot of new things that they will be experiencing, like new tools and maybe even new programming languages that they have to work with, and they just don't know the pitfalls yet of each of these tools. However, larger game companies will be able to end up eliminating crunch periods. The only thing though is they need more of a push to do that, as it's currently beneficial for them to keep crunch within their company, and unionization of workers would allow for the period of crunch to be eliminated as employees can fight back against these practices. And that is it.